Barred from a press conference and silenced by those in power, journalist Michael Crowe faced threats that tore his life apart. But his investigation, once exposed, would ignite protests and bring down a corrupt regime. What happened next will shock even the most seasoned. But let's start from the beginning. Michael Crowe, a seasoned black journalist with a reputation for uncovering uncomfortable truths, arrived at the prestigious National Press Freedom Conference with a determined stride. In his bag, he carried a report that could shake the city to its core, a months-long investigation into corrupt backroom deals involving high-ranking politicians and senior law enforcement. His findings painted a damning picture of how marginalized communities were systematically oppressed through illegal evictions, police misconduct, and embezzled public funds. The grand hall of the conference buzzed with excitement, filled with journalists, editors, and media executives exchanging pleasantries and discussing the agenda. Yet, as Michael stepped inside, he immediately sensed something was wrong. His name was missing from the list of panelists. The discussion topics seemed conveniently sanitized, carefully curated to avoid controversy. Determined to get answers, Michael approached the registration desk. Behind it stood Patrick Carter, the event coordinator, a middle-aged white man with a polished demeanor and a subtle air of condescension. Patrick's gaze sharpened as Michael approached. "I'm sorry, but we had to make some last-minute changes to the agenda," Patrick said with a thin, practiced smile. "We're focusing on broader topics today." Michael's jaw tightened. The words were a transparent excuse, and the undertone of dismissal was impossible to ignore. Glancing at the list of attendees, he noted familiar names from prominent outlets, almost all of them white. It was clear, despite his groundbreaking work, he wasn't seen as part of their circle. As the conference began, Michael was pushed to the margins. His attempts to engage in discussions were politely rebuffed, his questions brushed aside as irrelevant or disruptive. Colleagues averted their gaze, their whispered conversations stopping as he passed. The message was clear. He was unwelcome, not just because of his findings, but because of who he was. The irony stung. A conference championing freedom of speech was actively excluding a voice that threatened to disrupt the status quo. But Michael Crowe wasn't someone who gave up easily. He had fought too hard and uncovered too many truths to let them be silenced. His story, and his fight, was far from over. Back in the newsroom, Michael Crowe sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The lively, supportive environment he once thrived in now felt cold and distant. His editor, Lisa Montgomery, who had always championed his investigative work, suddenly became unreachable. His emails went unanswered, his calls sent straight to voicemail. When he finally cornered her in her office, he noticed the tension in her posture. Shoulders hunched, avoiding his gaze. "Lisa, what's going on?" Michael asked, his voice firm but laced with concern. "Why are you dodging me?" Lisa sighed deeply, rubbing her temples before finally looking up. Her usual confident demeanor had been replaced by a weary, nervous expression. "Michael, you've stirred up a hornet's nest," she admitted. "The higher-ups are worried about liability." "Liability?" Michael frowned. "Since when is exposing corruption a liability? Isn't that our job?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's more complicated than that. You're going after people with power, people with influence. They've threatened to pull advertising. If that happens, we could lose the paper." Michael's heart sank. He had expected resistance from the corrupt officials he was investigating, but hearing his own newsroom caving to external pressure felt like a betrayal. "So we let them win?" he challenged. "We let corruption fester because we're scared of losing revenue?" Lisa's gaze softened, guilt flickering in her eyes. I don't like it either, Michael. But we have families to feed, employees to pay. Sometimes, it's not a fight we can afford. But Michael couldn't let it go. The system he was trying to expose was doing exactly what he had predicted, closing ranks, silencing dissent. He decided to take matters into his own hands. Turning to social media, Michael began releasing key pieces of his investigation. Documents, audio clips, photos. Each post meticulously crafted to tell the story of corruption within the city's government. His posts quickly went viral, igniting outrage across the community. But with attention came danger. Anonymous threats flooded his inbox. Stop digging or you'll regret it. We know where your family lives. His wife, Angela, noticed his growing anxiety. One evening, as they tucked their daughter into bed, she took his hand. Whatever happens, we'll face it together, she said firmly. But don't lose yourself in this fight. Her words grounded him. Michael wasn't just fighting for justice. He was fighting to secure a future for his family, a future free from fear and oppression. The next morning, Michael received an unexpected call from Detective Rachel Green, a black officer who had seen his posts online. Michael, I've been following your investigation. I know you're right. I've seen things in the department, things that don't sit right with me. Rachel offered him a meeting at a discreet location. They met in a small diner on the edge of town, where Rachel slid him a folder. This is the missing piece, she whispered. Evidence of payouts, cover-ups, and illegal raids. It's all there. Michael flipped through the documents, his heart racing. This was the proof he needed to blow the story wide open. Why are you helping me? He asked. Rachel's gaze hardened. Because I'm tired of being part of a system that destroys my own people. With this new evidence, Michael published an expose that shook the city. The headlines screamed corruption, and people demanded accountability. Protests erupted outside City Hall, with demonstrators holding signs that read, "Justice for our communities," and "Expose the truth." But Michael knew the fight wasn't over. The mayor and police chief, two of the main perpetrators, were still in power. The mayor, Richard Whitmore, held a press conference to address the growing scandal. Flanked by officers in uniform, he painted Michael as a rogue journalist, spreading misinformation. This city has always been a beacon of safety and prosperity, Whitmore declared. We won't let baseless accusations tear us apart. Watching the live broadcast, Michael's blood boiled. The lies, the arrogance, it was infuriating. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was Rachel. Turn on Channel 6. Michael switched the TV to the local station, where a breaking news alert flashed across the screen. Footage from a leaked body cam was playing. It showed officers, under orders from the police chief, raiding a predominantly black neighborhood without cause, brutalizing residents, and planting evidence. The public was outraged. The protests grew louder. The mayor and police chief tried to contain the fallout, but it was too late. Days later, both men resigned in disgrace. The city council launched an independent investigation, promising reform. Michael, standing at the heart of the protests, watched as the community he fought for came together, demanding justice. As he looked around, he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Angela, holding their daughter. You did it, she said softly. You made a difference. Michael nodded, tears in his eyes. He hadn't just brought down a corrupt regime. He had sparked a movement, a reminder that truth, no matter how inconvenient, could never be silenced.